Yeah, we found a body down by the beach.
A 17-year-old is found murdered.
She knew them well enough to let them get very close.
If she knew her killer, do you think she'd arranged to meet them?
And when locals suspect a troubled recluse is the killer,
My neighbors don't speak to me.
Careful light misfits.
Perez fears mob justice may rule.
There is nothing tying them to this except talk. Is it possible she could have been making a film?
I don't know.
Ah, come on!
And when the body of a girl missing for 19 years is found,
So we're running 2 murder inquiries now.
locals are convinced a troubled recluse killed both girls.
She said she was going to make people angry.
What do you want? Witnesses who saw him with his hands around the girls' necks?
Shetland.
I think crime is so popular because it's a rollicking good read, and it's pace and it's suspense and it's wanting to know what's going to happen next. So partly it's that. And it's also that sense of facing evil vicariously. We have this horror of dreadful things happening out there. And if we read about them and then there's some resolution at the end, somehow they're not quite so frightening. I'd been writing for quite a long time before Raven Black, but I suppose it's the book that brought me out of complete and utter obscurity. So I'm very, very grateful to it. And it's about, I'm very glad that I had a chance to write and write and write and be paid for writing before I became very popular. Because as you say, it's about craft, it's about learning the job. And much better to be paid while you're doing it. My first books are dreadful. We surprise ourselves by, I surprise myself by observing. I can't imagine a writer who doesn't use public transport, for instance, or doesn't sit in small cafes in rundown streets, because you listen to people and they're just fascinating, and you come up with stories and interest, and it's that curiosity that keeps me and keeps most writers going, I think. That what if? So you see somebody, I see somebody on the train, and you're just always telling stories about what might explain odd behaviour. Yeah, that I must be one of the few people who is delighted by the businessman on his telephone, because I'm eavesdropping madly. I'm already working out whether it's his wife or his mistress that he's making his excuses to. My involvement with the television isn't contractual at all. So it's about relationships and friendships and a sort of mutual respect, I think. So right from the beginning, because of the place thing, I've asked if the scriptwriters could come and do a trip to wherever the books are set. So it's become a lovely tradition, certainly on Vera, that the scriptwriters for each series come up. We hire a minibus, we take them round, I show them the places that I have in my head when I'm writing the scenes. And they can either use that or not, but I find that they do use that. And it helps them understand the background to the stories, and it helps them understand the characters. So we do that. And more recently, I went up in May with the Shetland scriptwriters for the new series. And that was more tricky because it's expensive to take people to Shetland. It's flights and accommodation and all that. And money that's spent on trips like that aren't spent on the screen, but we did it. We managed to get them there, and I think it was so valuable. We met in a crime convention in the UK called Crime Fest in Bristol, and I'd been writing for much longer than Louise, but without any success at all. So my first 20 years of being published, nobody had heard of me. I sold just enough to get above the accountant's line, just to keep, but I never got advances. I'd write the book, and then I wrote a book called Raven Black, which is the first of the Shetland books, which won the Gold Dagger and made a huge difference to me. At about that time, Louise was writing Still Life, so we bumped into each other because Still Life just went stratospheric very quickly. And in both our books, I think, and we'll ask Louise to talk about this in a bit, I think the characters grow out of the place that they are. Mm-hmm. And people, some new writers, I think of landscape or a setting as just being a pretty backdrop or an interesting backdrop. It's not, because people grow out of the communities where they live. And so in both our books, setting influences character, but also it influences plot. I think it's the small details that bring a scene and a book to life, because you don't want to generalize. You can't describe in general. What makes a scene spring to life is the small details. So I can remember in one book just somebody baking scones and talking about how if you put scones close together on a baking tray, they won't spread. And that detail, I think, said a lot about the woman, the character as a cook, but it also said something about her, about her precision and the way that she wanted things to be perfect and the way that she could do it standing on her head because she'd done it so often. So it's all about showing, not telling, I think, that in just that one sentence you can say an awful lot about a character and about how she lives her life. I really don't plan much at all before I start writing. I'll have thought about people, I think, and there might be some subject that I want to explore in the book because I'm not quite sure about it myself, and by writing through it I find out a bit more what I think about it. But I write like a reader, so I'll start with a scene and I'll write the first scene, and then I need to know what's going to happen next, so I write the next scene. So I probably don't know who my victim is, never mind about who my murderer is, when I start writing the book. It's very, very
do you
organic.
Mind if I ask a question? How many drafts do you do then?
A lot, and I'll rewrite as I'm going. But I think people ask what the secret is to being a good writer, and I think you read a lot. And the more you read, the more you have a sense of what builds a story and what shapes a good story. I think that's what we both do, is explore that grey zone, because neither of us write monsters. We write ordinary people who do wicked things sometimes or are put under so much pressure, but I have never written somebody that I couldn't see through their eyes, see the world through their eyes, or step inside their shoes. And I think we both do that. Yeah, the Shetland series probably means more to me than the Vera one, because as I say, I dropped out of university. I went and worked in the Bird Observatory in Fair Isle just because I needed a job. I knew nothing about birds when I was there, and I was cooking, and I couldn't cook either, but when you're 19, that doesn't really matter much, I don't think. And I met my husband there because he came as a visiting ornithologist. And I was back in Fair Isle a month ago, and I flew in on one of the little 6-seater planes to go, and because my husband died just before Christmas, so it was a return visit to go and recover my roots and go and say goodbye to some friends there. So it means a lot.
How about with Shetland? Were you at all worried about how the people of Shetland would view?
Yeah, I started writing Shetland after I'd lived there for a while, so that I did feel that, like you, that I was an outsider writing about a place that I didn't know quite well. And I talked to somebody there, and he said, just go for it and we'll help you. And they did. They have done. So.
But now people are traveling there because of the series, and how's the island sort of responding to that?
I think the island used to have lots of money because oil came in there, and now the oil isn't there anymore. They're very happy to take tourists' money instead.
But it's been life-changing, hasn't it, for Shetland? Because Shetland now has this international adoration.
Yeah, I think so. But Shetlanders have always had outsiders coming in because it was seamen, or it was whalers, or it was oilmen. So they're just very rooted and very, very sensible people, and I love them very much. Now, I tell stories, and I think we've talked a lot about what lies behind the stories, but if you write fiction, you're helping people to see the world through other people's eyes, and that must be a good thing, because what we need at the moment is more tolerance and more understanding. And fiction can do that in a way that non-fiction can't. Wildfire is the very last Shetland book, so it was odd. In a way, I knew that it was the right thing to do because I wanted to finish before everybody got fed up with me and Jimmy Perez and Shetland. I knew that I was doing the right thing, but all the same, the thought of not coming back to Shetland again to write more books was very sad. Obviously, I'll come back to Shetland again to see friends and just because I love the islands, but not to have a specific purpose in doing it, not to come looking for ideas and looking for stories, did seem quite difficult to deal with. But the first book happened, it was between 2004 and 2005, midwinter. It was the most beautiful day I can remember in Shetland, and lots of ravens very black against the snow, because I write crime fiction. I thought if there was blood as well, it would be mythic, really, like a fairy story. That's how Raven Black, the first of the Shetland books, came to be written. I used to have that image of that beautiful day in my head. It was going to be a standalone novel. I wasn't going to carry on writing about Shetland. But it did very well for me. It was a career changer, the book. My publisher wanted more, and first of all there was going to be a quartet, each book set in a different season, and those books all have colours in the title. There was still more that I wanted to say about Shetland, because Shetland changes and develops, and I wanted to look at those things too, and so I decided there would be 4 more, and those are all named after elements. So Dead Water, Thin Air, Cold Earth. So I knew that the last book would have to have fire in the title, and that's how Wildfire was started. So the book is now finished, and it's kind of the end of the story for my Jimmy Perez, but the television series will carry on, and that's good too, because I know that he'll live on still